Okay, thanks, Oli. So next, we want to think about the holistic advising portion of this framework. So coming back to how we're approaching it, how does data inform advising in their practices? What kind of strategies are advisors using to support, guide, and develop students? And how can advisors engage with faculty and academic support programs to align services and support students? So let's first start with let's define holistic advising. So holistic advising acknowledges that there may be non-academic factors that impact academic performance. These can include personal situations, social issues, work, family obligations, and societal factors. So as part of the HSI funding, some new positions were created that are called EOP STEM counselors. And what was really important about the EOP STEM counselors is that they were selected with intentionality around multicultural competencies, working with first-generation students, students of color, students who have been in marginalized environments, and as well as selecting counselors that are already highly qualified, giving them extended training and boot camps about how to implement holistic advising. So the next thing we want to think about is institutional policies related to advising. So there's two policies that come up that are specific to Biology 20A. So Biology 20A is one of what's called qualifying courses for the life science major. So there's a number of courses listed here that students have to take and pass. Students also cannot earn 2 or more no passing grades. Otherwise, they cannot qualify for the major. Another campus policy that may impact Biology 20A students is students who may be in the position to possibly retake a course for a third time. And there are some situations out there that definitely this is important to provide students with this pathway, but there are some institutional procedures that you have to follow, and one of them requires that you have to get approval from your college to do this. So thinking about these sort of policies and thinking about that these policies, since we already know that our Latinx students earn more no passing grades in this specific course, we know that these policies disproportionately impact our Latinx students. So when thinking about these policies, we want to think about what kind of resources are students drawing from to understand the policies and navigate the policies. So in winter of 2018, we thought about this and analyzed students' academic records in relationship to these policies, thinking about the students who had just taken Biology 20A in fall of 2017 and maybe in this no passing situation, so thinking about how they might navigate deciding if they're going to retake Biology 20A in winter 18 and how that could best work for them. So we wanted to preserve access to the winter course for students who may have not passed it in fall of 17. We wanted the students to have what would be the best fit for them. So this had two pieces to it. So one was that there were two offerings of the course. One had the traditional large lecture format, and another had the active learning format. And that format is a smaller course. So we reserved courses in both courses, and then we went, rather than just going on a wait list, we actually invited students who had not passed 20A to request a permission code, and then we used a Google form that asked them questions to better understand the students and their needs. So in this particular quarter, the class was going to be offered by the same course. So John Tampkin had taught it in the fall and was also teaching it again in the winter for the large lecture. So once the grades were posted, Professor Tampkin reached out to the students and invited them to the winter course and guided them through the Google request process because at this point it was permission code only. There was then an assessment as to what next steps were needed, and this included coordinating with the EOP STEM counselors, offering students holistic advising support, and also holistic review of students' work with the colleges and department for approval of the 3-peats. As students were filling out the form, applications were reviewed and they were assigned to the active learning or the traditional course. And then if they were in those courses, they were also asked to follow another survey for section preferences. And this kind of gets back to another situation that we had found with students, is that often students who are repeating a course only have access to the sections that have been least popular or most recently opened, and that may or may not work with their other schedules, things like work and things like that. And so we really wanted to ensure that students would be able to have access to sections that would work for them as well. So in terms of numbers, we outreached to 168 students who had not passed a class. Again, these students are in danger of not qualifying for the major if they had no pass one of the other courses, or they may not qualify if they no pass again. We also reached out to 27 students who might be considering the 3-peat, and invited all of these students to participate in the enrollment process for Biology 20A for the winter. So you can see that of the 168, over 100 students enrolled in either the traditional or active learning class, and they had a pass rate of 86%. That was actually higher than the average pass rate for students who were taking it for the first time. So them retaking this course, they were successful. And of the 27 students who would be in the 3-peat situation, 9 were enrolled in Bio 20A for Winter 18, and all of these students passed. So now we're moving to the second implementation of this advising support, and here are some key points that we have been thinking about. So one of the things is outreaching to students as soon as grades are posted is key. We know that there's a really short time frame between quarters, so assisting students with those decisions during that time means that we might need to have staff work during campus closure, and that is actually what happened during this most recent implementation. We also needed to create a report that we could easily identify the students who would be navigating these policies, and we did that through an InfoView report. We also really want to think about our practices. So thinking about that the outreach itself, knowing that the students have just recently not passed a class, making sure that the outreach is not stigmatizing. For this, we've worked closely with Professor Rebecca Kovar-Rubius regarding messaging. We also know that it's important that the email itself is actually coming from the faculty, inviting them to retake the course. And then another piece is that's really important to work closely with the colleges and the department advisors so that they're aware of such a program, as these are slightly different procedures than what's used in other courses. And again, being aware of the program and the policy implementation. So I also wanted to highlight a few other practices just in general from the MCD biology department that aren't coming from the grant or grant objectives, but are things that really are spaces where their department has really used data to make change, and that it's again coming back to this idea that access to data does result in changing some of these different things. So some of the things that they have done are they've initiated a faculty committee on diversity and inclusion. Through some of the data analysis that we've provided over the years, they've been able to get access to, they've reconsidered prerequisite policies for Biology 20A. The department initiated a new graduate student TA course, so again, supporting the development of the TAs who are going to be working in these courses. And they've really thought and taken into consideration analysis and impact of major qualification policies. So these aren't the only practices or programs that the department takes to improve equitable outcomes, and this isn't the only department that uses these kinds of practices. So I'm not able to highlight them all here, but here is just at least a few examples. So coming back to our idea of kind of being a practitioner with inquiry, some of the things that they're currently thinking about is thinking about in relationship to what we just talked about. So if a student didn't meet the qualification policy but was granted an appeal, were those students then successful in graduating in the life science major? Because again, something like that would give them real evidence to say how the qualification policy, the importance of the qualification policy. So next, I'm going to put on my hat of Director of Learning Support Services. So in our academic support circle, we have programs such as Learning Support Services and ACE. And for this, I'm going to focus on the type of support that Learning Support Services offers in Biology 20A. So Learning Support Services supports Biology 20A mostly with modified supplemental instruction and small group tutoring. So these programs are completely voluntary for students to attend, and they're led by undergraduates who have previously done well in the course, and generally these additional sessions are about an hour long. Our support in Biology 20A is actually pretty long-standing. We started working with Professor Tampkin back in 2009 and focused on developing weekly quizzes that could really focus the MSI sessions so that we were sure that the content of the MSI sessions themselves was really well aligned with what the professor's learning outcomes were for that week. Starting in 2009, we analyzed student records and identified that that if students had previously passed a course, if students took longer to satisfy the entry-level writing requirement, or if students had performed poorly on the first exam, that these were the best predictors for earning low grades in Biology 20A. And so what we did with that information was we then structured outreach to let students know that the programs existed and invited them to the programs around those analysis. In addition, we also started meeting weekly with the Biology 20A undergraduate learning support services staff to help plan the weekly sessions. In 2016, we did a remessaging activity where we looked at 3 different types of message. One was sort of the standard message, just telling them MSI exists, you should use it, it's a great program. One that had some growth messaging in it, and one that had growth and cultural messaging in it. And what we found was that students were more likely to sign up when the message didn't just explain the program, but also had some growth messaging in there, talking about students doing well when they, with effort, and effort being things like utilizing MSI services. So again, part of the SEMILLA grant gave us the opportunity to create new positions, and one of the new positions that was created was the STEM Skills Coordinator. And the idea behind the STEM Skills Coordinator was to really, again, think about what kind of adaptive expertise the practitioner has. So these practitioners have a dual role. They're ACE session leaders, and in their ACE sessions, they support students in STEM courses directly, so they really have the boots on the ground experience. And then they're also an LSS coordinator. And in their LSS role, they're, of course, mentoring other undergraduates in their development as educators. The coordinators also, again, run the weekly meetings that focus on educational theory and practical active learning strategies. So, as we mentioned, the skills coordinators do the direct outreach to the students. They conduct pre-quarter and post-exam direct outreach to students via campaigns and emails encouraging them to sign up and utilize services. All students are also informed about the MSI service through both emails as well as in-class announcements. And we also let the students know that students who receive failing grades on the first exam are still encouraged to use the MSI services using that growth mindset and anti-deficit language. The STEM skills coordinators also provide support via the weekly meetings. So the weekly meetings are a chance, a space to discuss course content, collaboratively prepare for MSI sessions, and develop the tutor's skills by exploring the connection between educational theory and effective pedagogy. So tutors gain, through these weekly meetings, they gain practice with facilitating discussions, evaluating students' needs, and implementing active learning techniques such as mental models, mind maps, entrance and exit tickets, and group work. Attention is also given to topics such as educational equity, disrupting institutionalized inequities, and identifying and combating implicit bias through discussions as well as guest speakers. Another important piece of the weekly meetings is it's really an ongoing development based on feedback. So each quarter we refine the weekly meetings and really through the feedback of the students, the tutors, and the LSS staff. So our next question is, does this work? So we as a unit need this access to formative and summative feedback. So do students who use MSI improve grades, retention, graduation? And what is the impact of this increased development of the MSI undergraduates through the weekly meetings? How is that having an impact that the MSI sessions seem to be more effective or not? And to that, I will hand it over to Edgar, who is helping us with an analysis to answer these questions. Okay, pause. So thank you, Edgar, for that. So we had talked about, what are some of the key takeaways that we hopefully gathered from today's presentation? So acknowledging and building on practitioners' expertise, this empowering of institutional agents. So from this, we talked about our practitioners, such as our faculty, such as our advisors, such as our academic support staff, but this faculty support is really essential. As was presented in the beginning of the presentation, that contextualization, that knowledge of what's happening in the classroom, we couldn't do this kind of work without the faculty support. Another aspect is this race-conscious student programs and advising. So again, looking at things with a race lens, thinking about what the outcomes are, but also being very intentional with what our programs and services are. The second takeaway is that practitioners are co-constructing the new knowledge with formative and summative feedback loops. So again, giving practitioners access to disaggregated data and then implementing these very rigorous evaluation plans and activities such as the one presented by Edgar. The third one is robust programming through these synergistic partnerships and collaboration. So the partnerships between giving access to the various practitioners, but also the practitioners with each other. So the faculty, the advising, and the academic support. One piece I didn't focus on very much here, but one of the other things that we do a lot with HSI initiatives is to use a logic model. And the logic model helps us with what those activities were. So when you remembered that chart I presented earlier, that gives you what those activities are, but really thinking about how those activities are embedded in a theoretical framework that tells you that there's actually that these activities should lead to those long-term outcomes, which was to decrease STEM attrition for our Latinx and low-income students. And our last takeaway is in this presentation today, we were able to give you some quantitative data, but we really needed to include some more qualitative data and really be thinking about the students' experiences a little bit more as well. So in some of our work, we have some recommended readings. You heard me reference the work of Dowd and Ben-Simone quite a bit, and that really comes from Engaging the Race Question. In partnership with CITL, we've also started a STEM faculty learning community that focuses specifically on teaching the large lecture STEM class. Currently in that group, we're using many resources, but on our current reading list is Learning How Learning Works. And finally, the Building Cultural Competencies books is used significantly from the MSI leaders, from the STEM learning skills coordinators in developing the MSI leaders and building their cultural competencies. And this book's been very helpful for us. So this acknowledgement page really doesn't do justice to all the acknowledgements that we really need to have here. I've said it before and I'll say it again, this work just does not happen alone. And like I said, this slide is just way too small to actually give you a better idea of everybody who's working to do this, although this gives you some idea of some of the key people who've worked specifically on this project. So as I had said at the beginning of the presentation, UCSC is actually seen as a leader in the UC system, specifically about work around HSIs. Every outside person who has come has been astounded that our work is not just confined to one office, but that instead we've been embedding new positions in various units. We partner closely with faculty and staff and students. And so all that sounds great, but I think we all know that there's a lot of work to do and it may be a long road ahead. So I want to think about ending with a call to action. So this process is one that's not going to be accomplished quickly. So that being said, I also want to acknowledge that just you being here, dedicating the time, already tells me that you're a dedicated partner. So I hope you leave thinking about what inspired you about this talk. Did you find any connections to your own work, or did you hear about something that you want to be a part of? Was there information here that you saw that you could take action on? So with all of that, I really want to thank you all for your involvement and invite you to contact either myself or Oli or Edgar with any questions or comments. Thank you.